So in this video, we're going to talk about building AI apps and the process that Hassan is using for the amazing AI apps that we have built. So I'm joined by Hassan. You might have known him from his time being a developer advocate at Vercel, or from the amazing apps that he has created since 2 years ago with this new AI wave. So Hassan, thank you very much for joining me on this session.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been a long time conversation that we wanted to have and actually talk over this stuff, talk over the apps that you've built and, the AI domain and the speed of which it is just growing and expanding. I feel like sometimes when I'm looking at the AI domain, I feel like I'm so far behind and I need to pause and think, oh, this whole thing just started a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago max. But it is going at a speed that every month, other week, there's a new library, there's a new model, and I feel like I'm so far behind and I can't catch up. I envy that you have been riding this wave from the get-go. So tell us about your journey into AI and how you got introduced to it and what you're doing now.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I got introduced into AI, kind of when the chat GPT craze happened. I think it was maybe like December 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. The first way I kind of got introduced into it is through a conference that we ran at Vercel. So we ran, our Next.js conf. I was one of the main people that helped with that. And after that conference, we had a ton of photos and we wanted to release like an image gallery. And so I built an image gallery and we were about to release it. And then our CEO was like, stop, it's not accessible. It doesn't have alt tags, which was a very good point. And then I'm sitting there thinking like, oh my God, there's like 500, 600 images in here. Like it's going to take me a year to manually go and label everyone. And I was like, I wonder if there's like an image to text API, something that can take these images and generate these alt tags for me. And so that was my first AI project. I went and I found an API to do it. And it's like what I love about the AI space as well is that I feel like you don't have to be, you don't have to have a PhD in machine learning to use this stuff. Like you just have to be a web developer. You just have to know how to use an API. And there's all these great companies that take a lot of the open source models and offer them to you as an API. So I found one of them, found the API, I built it out, and it ended up doing really, really well. I double checked the AI models work, and I think it got maybe 2 images wrong. But that was kind of my first, starter project into AI where I was like, oh my God, that literally saved me 5 hours, 10 hours of work. I don't know how much it was exactly, but I was like, wow, that actually saved me a lot of work. And so that was the first thing I built, and then I open sourced and launched it as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's I think that's the best way to get started on anything, really, by actually building a project that you're going to use. That's where you would see, what all the excitement is about, and you actually use it. But you get also over this barrier of thinking, oh, this is complicated stuff. Because I had the same thing. When you hear AI, you feel like you have to be a machine learning engineer to be able to use it. But once you actually use it and start implementing it into different projects, it's literally any developer can do these APIs that you can call, you pass in information, you get back information. So it's good that you started there. I remember back in the days, I didn't see this project of yours, but I think the first thing that I saw was probably the Room GPT, where you would upload an image and then it would redesign the room. And I was like, this is such a good idea, because I have a background in real estate, and this instantly to me was like, stagers can use this, real estate agents can use this, I don't know, contractors for renovations can use this. And I think the application is so wide and so useful that got triggered my interest to see, okay, I can use this, build an app maybe on a subscription. And I never did, but that was what piqued my interest in it. Tell me about that project too, because that project created some buzz. I have seen multiple copies and duplicates of Room GPT around.
Yeah, I feel like that's the first AI project that put me on the map, and actually did really, really well and everything. So honestly, that project, I was mostly inspired by another project at the time called Interior AI that was trying to do this. And by Levels.io, awesome indie hacker. And he had this project, I tried it out, and it wasn't very good, honestly. I was like, this isn't great. and I was like, can I try to build something similar? And so I went and I tried to build something similar and it didn't really work. And the issue was I was using this API called Stable Diffusion, which is really good at generating images, but it also has this like image to image feature where you can give it an image and a prompt. Like you give it an image of your room and then you say like, hey, can you like redesign my room in this style? But the issue with Stable Diffusion is it wouldn't respect like the dimensions of the room, the depth, like the image that it generated looked nothing like the original one. So this is kind of like a model limitation at this point. So I was like, okay, like can't really build a better one. And then this new model came out called ControlNet, and it completely changed the game. This model is really, really good at taking in images and keeping the image structure exactly the same while modifying things about the image. And so when I saw that, I was like, bing, okay, I can build this app, I can build a better version. And so I went and I launched Room GPT and I tagged Levels.io and I was like, hey man, like you should switch to ControlNet from Fusion. He ended up switching a few days after. But yeah, and I launched and it was like, I feel like one of the first big applications built with ControlNet. It launched like a few days after the model came out. And yeah, I think I had like 500,000 people use it in the first week. I had like my friends that were DMing me saying, hey, you're on my like TikTok For You page, because like random people were making videos about it. And to this day, it's still, you know, my biggest app ever. It's still the app that's done the most amount of traction. And I think it was just like, I got lucky that I built it like right after this big model came out. And it just got picked up in a lot of places. So that's
Beautiful.
kind of the process.
Is it monetized or no? It's still free thing.
That's my only app that's monetized ever out of any apps I've built before. And it's because I had to monetize. I mean, after the first week, I told you 500,000 people used it. It's not a cheap model. Every single image that someone uploaded and ran, I think cost me like maybe 1 or 2 cents. And you can imagine, you know, like millions of images being uploaded. I was using Replicate for it at the time, which is this AI provider that gives you this API. And I remember getting a $7,000 bill from Replicate after a few weeks. And I was just like, yeah, I can't pay this. Like, this is too much. Can you guys help me out? And they were really, they were kind enough to pay that for me. Because the project was open source and, you know, had thousands of stars and everybody cloning the project had to create a Replicate account. So it was driving a lot of traffic to them. But they were kind enough to also sponsor. But I couldn't, you know, have them pay, you know, $7,000 every couple of weeks. Like that's kind of insane. And so I was at Vercel at the time. I remember talking to my boss and saying like, hey, like, I don't know what to do about this project. Like I might have to shut it down. And he was like, just put a Stripe link on there. And I was like, all right. So I went and I ended up adding pricing to it. And then that like killed a lot of the usage because it was free. So that's the only app that I've monetized because I was basically forced to either monetize it or shut it down.
Yeah. Makes sense, man. Makes sense, man. Back in that time that when you released the app, also, a lot of these APIs were more expensive than now. Like in the beginning, even chat completions was more expensive. As these new models coming in, it's becoming more affordable. But even at the end of the day, even at a cheaper price, if when you're running it for free and people keep using it because it was a useful tool, you're going to reach a point where you have to decide, do I just keep it for free or shut it down or just monetize it? Are you still like actively developing any features on it or no, it's just the thing that you built 2 years ago?
Yeah, it's essentially just a thing that I built. I should probably spend more time on it. It still has, you know, 100,000 people that use it every month. And so it's still like being used and people still go and pay for it. And it's just like a thing. In the background that I don't worry about it a lot. But no, it's not really undergoing any active development. In hindsight, I probably should have, you know, it really blew up and I should have doubled down and shipped new features. And ironically, I saw other people doing that. They take the project, they clone it because it's open source, and then they just built on it. And some guy actually got into YC and raised a 3 million seed round using my code original. And so it's pretty incredible to see. Like it had a lot of potential. I feel like it still has a lot of potential, but I didn't do a very good job in doubling down. I feel like I have this like shiny object syndrome where I launched it, that's it, you know, it's done, it's launched, next project. And, you know, in a lot of cases, I like that. And I think it's good that I just like pumping out these projects. But yeah, looking back, that's an area of growth for sure. Like if I have a project that ends up doing that well, like I should double down and ship some new features and some new versions.
I think you were in your developer advocacy mode so much. You weren't thinking business. You were like, okay, I'm just creating this templates. People can it's open source. They can clone, they can use it. I'm not benefiting for myself. Whereas other folks who I have seen a lot of people in the AI domain, they're not even developers. Then they have snatched some code or used some no-code tools, but they have created these SaaS products and they're just like making businesses out of it, like making good money. But then when it comes to us developers, sometimes we're not that geared toward the business side of things. We're like, okay, this is a cool tool that I'm building and helping a lot of people trying to build their own AI apps. So I appreciate that part of your work as well. All of these projects that you have created is literally a resource for anybody who wants to get into this space to use this, as a roadmap. So I really appreciate that. Room GPT comes out and then it gets great success. You find your way in the AI, but you don't stop there. There's more apps that you create after that, one after the other. Is there anyone that you want to mention in a specific before we dive into the last one that you created, Llama Code?
I don't think anything specific. I think it's part of my job that I really enjoy. I feel like I'm very lucky that I can get paid to build different things like this, in addition to, some docs and content and developer experience stuff. Honestly, I just try to think of what's the most impressive demo I can build with the latest models. Like you said, this space changes so quickly. So a lot of the time I have no idea what I'm going to build until a week before. And then I'll just spend a week heads down, just building something based off of a new release that's coming or whatever is coolest. So it's everything, ranging from image, generation tools to AI search engines to taking notes with your voice, just anything I can think of.
Yeah, that's cool too. Taking notes with your voice and then kickstarting, stuff in the background, with Notion, with creating tasks, to-do lists, shopping lists. This is actually another area that I'm interested in. Now, I wanted to pick your brain about something a bit personal in real estate. So, for let's say you are dealing with a website for listings and you're dealing with, you can build a recommendation engine with embeddings to basically see what the user is using and then therefore recommend similar. It can be movies, it can be listings in terms of the houses and stuff. But if you were to build something that generates or estimates home valuations or the property's value based on recent sales, have you seen anything that uses AI? Maybe it can be drawing similarities based on embeddings from these different listings and then different characteristics. And then have you had any experience in that area?
That's really interesting. No, I don't have any experience in that area. I haven't seen anything specifically around that. But if I were to do something like that, I'd try to get a database of, all of the home images and listings with as much detail as possible. And then, like you said, it would be embeddings would be an interesting one to try out. Another thing you could do is you could augment, if you get home kind of pictures, you can take those, you can use a vision model that goes image to text to describe the home. So for every picture, you get a big description, basically, or 2 or 3 paragraph description. And then you just have a lot more context about what that home is. You get all the different attributes, number of bedrooms, all that kind of stuff. And then you can just embed everything. And then when someone uploads a new image, you can do the same thing. You can basically take that image of a new home, let's say, that you haven't seen. You pass that through a vision model that does image to text, of text describing that image that a user has put in, or an image or a link or whatever it is. And then you can do some kind of similarity search with embeddings to try to find the one that matches it the most. And with similarity search, I think that's just step one, to have a basic product. And then there's so many ways to optimize your kind of RAG pipeline to do better. Yeah. You can add the re-ranking step. You can play around with different embeddings. You can fine tune a model. And at that point, it would just be define some good evals, essentially. Here's a picture of a home. I know how much it's worth. I'm going to have the AI estimate and see how close it can get, and have 10 or 20 tests and basically try out a bunch of different embedding techniques and AI models and everything until you get the highest accuracy possible, and then launch that. So that's how I would think about something like that.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really cool.
Yeah, it's interesting to incorporate images into it because if you're just working based off of the attributes of the house, I guess the solution is already out there. Although you won't see it often on regular sites, it's just like big corporations like Zillow down in the States has such a thing where they estimate your home because they have the history of your house. But when you are dealing with a new listing and whether or not it's renovated, if it is a new house or not. So if we can also read or have some context from the images, that will be, I think, much more accurate or closer to the actual value. So yeah, this is an area that I'm interested in just because I come in my past life, I was in real estate. So I always have that curiosity to see what can I apply to that domain from what I'm learning here. Okay, so one thing that I want to, my goal from this session is to learn from you is the process in which you go through to make these apps. Where do you start? How do you iterate over your code? How do you decide what models to use? Where do you research? What platforms do you use for hosting these different models, APIs, and whatnot? And maybe you can take us through your process and also Llama Code, which is the last app that you've built, so that we can learn how you think about building these projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do I think about building projects? I think I generally try to start with what I'm going to build and scope it down to like a very, very small idea. A lot of people don't realize this, but most of my apps have a single API endpoint. You have something, someone uploads an image or enters text, it does a single API endpoint, it comes back. That's it. For a lot of my apps, it's really that simple. And you can build really, really amazing things when you scope down an idea. So that's how I think. Like, I think, okay, what can I build? Like all this stuff. Okay, I think of an idea. I try to make it so that I can describe it in 5 words. My baseline of like, okay, this is simple enough to actually ship. And I try to make it a single API endpoint. And then it's kind of interesting. Like I build AI apps, but really I spend 80% plus of my time on the UI for all the apps that I build. It's not the AI part that I'm spending time on. And it's just because of the very simple truth that I've had to learn over and over that like people won't care about your app if it doesn't look good. You can have the most advanced AI models and everything, but if it doesn't look good, people don't use it. And so I focus a lot on the UI and the UX, try to keep it simple. And then at the same time, you do want to use impressive AI models if you can. And so usually like, for keeping up with AI models, I mean, it's hard. I just generally use Twitter. I just follow a bunch of people that tweet about this stuff. There's a lot of great newsletters as well. There's one called Ben's Bytes that I like to use, and what I like about him is he posts AI news and like cool AI products he sees, and so I get like inspiration from that. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of great AI models, a lot of great people to follow on Twitter, a lot of newsletters. You can kind of get your information from wherever you want, but just knowing in general, like, okay, what's coming out, what are the new capabilities of what's coming out. You can follow AI providers as well. I mean, OpenAI, Anthropic. For open source models, you can follow people like Together AI, which I'm biased because I work there. Replicate is pretty great for a lot of image fine-tuned models. Fal.ai is great. So generally I try to just have an overview of like, okay, like what's coming out, what's out there. And then you always want to assume that AI models are going to get cheaper and better, which is awesome. Like that's just like such a powerful assumption. And that's why like, with Room GPT, I think it went like crazy viral, and AI models were a little bit more expensive back then. But since then, I haven't had to monetize any project, which is awesome, despite the fact that a lot of the projects have hundreds of thousands of people using them. And it's just because like inference just gets cheaper and cheaper. And so anyway, that's like more general advice for what I do. But practically, how do I start my projects? I use Next.js, which I know you talk a lot about on your channel.
Yeah.
Which is great. Yeah, for me, I mean, Next.js just does it. I've been using it for a few years. It does everything I need it to. And yeah, so I'll start with a blank Next.js app, literally create Next app. I'll take out the custom CSS and the main page, and then I'll just start working on stuff right there. Create my API endpoint with whatever I need, make sure that it actually works the way I want it to work. And then construct a very simple UI. If I'm doing stuff with images, I'll have an uploader that I add there. And I'll either use, Amazon S3 or something like ByteScale. I try to use a lot of great SaaS tools. I mean, I feel like the Next.js ecosystem is awesome and integrates with a lot of different things. For auth, I'll use either NextAuth or Clerk. Tailwind for styling, TypeScript for the language. And then, yeah, a lot of my AI models, I mean, I work at Together AI, so they're all from Together AI, all the models I've been using over the last year. And I'll just kind of try to build something like the tiniest MVP I can build and get it out. Because what I've realized is you don't really know what projects will do well and what projects won't. Like even now, I've been building like 10 AI apps a year for the last 2 years. So I've built like around 20 now. I still don't really have a great sense of like when something I launch is going to get 5,000 users versus 500,000 users. I really don't know. And so the best way to know is to scope down and then ship and see how people react to it. And then if a lot of people use it, then you can double down and ship some more features. If people don't like it, then that's fine. Ideally haven't spent a ton of time. And I try to scope things down to a very short amount of time. Most of my apps I build in under a week. And then I publish them, and then I figure out what I want to do from there.
I see. Okay. So first step is to scope down the project into a simple step that can be described in a sentence. You build a simple prototype of one single API and see if you get the result that you wanted, and then probably from that point on, you ship a minimum viable product to get some responses, and then you iterate if you have some traction on it and build on it from there, rather than, sitting, closing down on yourself for a month, building something and then realizing nobody's even interested in this solution. So I really like that idea of simplifying the scope down to one single step or one single API, which is crazy to think these AI apps that you've built very powerful, but it's just one task, one simple API, and it just does things. So you mentioned Together AI. I want to also learn more about what it is. Do you want to share what Together AI is and how folks can use it? We're going to include links in the description, but before we dive into like your sample project, I want to learn more about Together AI because I haven't used it personally.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give the web developer definition, where it's basically an AI infra platform. You can think of it as fairly similar to OpenAI, but for open source models. So we let you interact with chat models like Llama 3 and all the other open source ones. We do image models like Stable Diffusion and Flux, code models, vision models. So we basically just give you a really nice, simple API, which we will probably take a look at when we look at one of my projects, to interact with a lot of different AI models. So you can use them in your apps. You can also fine tune these models on your own data. We have a fine tuning API. And then, a part of our business is also like we have GPU clusters, and we will sell them to you if you're like a machine learning team and you know exactly what you want to do, but you just need GPUs. We'll do that as well. For the purposes of the web dev audience, I think the API is really the big part of the business, to call AI models and fine tune them.
So when you say fine tune them, does that also mean creating embeddings and then using that data?
So that's a good question. So, there's two kind of ways to build these like custom applications with your own data. One way is to do embeddings. And so, like you said, if you have a bunch of different products, you can take them, you can run them through we have an embedding API, generate all these vectors, and then store them in some kind of vector database. And then, you can run, cosine similarity search between them and surface the products that are most useful. We'll use this in the context of a chatbot or a customer support chatbot specifically. A lot of customers will take their internal guides, like let's say they have 1,000 internal PDFs that describe everything about their system. They'll take those, they'll embed them, and they'll throw them in a vector database. And then when someone asks a question to this chatbot, what it'll do is it'll take the user's question, it'll embed that question itself, and then it'll run a similarity search between that question and all of the chunks that are in there. And it will try to grab, basically, out of those 1,000, it'll try to find the one PDF where the answer lies. And then it'll finally send all of that to a chat model. It'll just send the chat model that one PDF, or even you can embed it at like a paragraph level even. So it might find the top 5 most relevant paragraphs. It'll send that to a user, to the chat API. So all the chat API sees is like the user's question and the 5 most relevant paragraphs. And so that's like one of the most popular ways that people use our API and just in general for AI apps. And so that's called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, with embeddings. So there's the RAG route. The other route is fine tuning. And so RAG is really good if you want to augment an AI model with additional information. And fine tuning is really good if you want to affect, how the model behaves, the style that it speaks in. So for example, and I might actually do this as a project, but I'm always thinking about like, what if I could build a Chrome extension that answers emails for me, where like instead of or even drafts the emails for you. So say you go to your email, what if like for every new email you have, you click and you get a sample response already. But the thing is, if I use a generic chat model, it probably I probably have to edit it a lot. What I really want is I want an AI model trained on all of my previous emails. So it knows how I write emails, how I reply. And so for that, I'd want to do fine tuning. So I download all of my emails, put them in like a format that we support, and then I would pass them into a model. And so the model would be trained on all of those emails and it would learn to basically emulate my writing style.
Got it. And it's good to know that Together AI has both. So if you wanted to use the API endpoint to create vectors from your data and then store the vectors in a database and then use that for RAG, or if you want to fine tune a model more specifically to the style you want it to respond with the structure that you want it to respond. Okay, awesome. Now, one thing that I wanted to ask is, before we go into the project, is I feel like the models are like, how can I say this? So the models are getting better and cheaper, as you said, but the whole AI wave or the whole hype, I think it's stabilizing, not in a bad way, but in a way that, yes, there are going to be more useful applications now, but it's not that crazy thing that people thought or we started off. Do you see the same thing?
Yeah, for sure. Like in terms of the AI, the hype cycle, essentially. Yeah, it's yeah, there's some people that are on the opposite end, which is like AI is horrible. I'll never use I'm a developer. I'll never use AI for my code editor, for writing code, for any of that. Like I'm way smarter than AIs. I'm not going to use anything. There's that one extreme, and then the other extreme is like LLMs write 95% of my code. I can build a full AI startup in 5 hours with my with AI. There's that like crazy extreme that's like, oh yeah, like that's it. I don't even know how to code and I can build this whole startup. And you're really the answer is somewhere in between those two things. Like I think some of AI is definitely like there's too much hype where I wish there weren't. But at the same time, there's a lot of areas that I feel like AI can still make a really big dent in, and that it hasn't. Like there's it's pretty incredible. I feel like how many things that I feel like people can build with real utility that will actually help. And yeah, and I'm just excited for it. I take I'm in the middle of those two extremes, and I take the optimistic approach of I think AI is awesome. I think there's so many cool ththings that people will build to continue to benefit more and more people with AI. Obviously, it has its negatives, and we can talk about that. But yeah, that's the way I like to look at it. I don't like either of those extremes.
I agree. I mean, in any technology, there's going to be bad actors that are going to misuse it, and it applies to this too. AI is powerful, and therefore it can kind of magnify that side of the things as well. But I agree with you. I'm in the same position where I think the application of AI and the utilities around this that is still untapped is so much, and it can help so many people, that the sum of it all, it will be positive. If you're thinking healthcare, if you're thinking education, if you're thinking how easier mundane tasks would be just with the use of an AI agent, we are going to have our own agents that are just trained on our own stuff. So I think it will be exciting to see what comes. So I wanted to get your take on it, since you're just in the domain building AI apps or working in an AI company. So why don't we just go to your project? If you wanted to walk us through Llama Code, what it is, how you built it, what APIs you're using, then maybe we talk about different models that Together AI also hosts.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, let me share my screen and I'll get started. Cool. Can you see my screen? Awesome. So Llama Coder, it lets you write a prompt and get a small React app. That's really it. I built it because this new model came out called Llama 3.1 405B, and this is like one of the most powerful open source models. Again, everything I build is not only open source, I only use open source models as well. And so, this came out and I thought, oh, it's like pretty good at coding. I wonder if I can get it to generate like React components for me. And it did that. And then I was like, okay, I wonder if I can get it to generate kind of like a full React app and actually render it in the browser. And that also did that. And what's cool is that you can I started adding more and more stuff to it, but essentially it's a single API endpoint again, where you come in here, you put in a prompt. I have my own augmented prompt that I add that I'll go into called a system prompt, where I tell it like, hey, you're a React and TypeScript and Tailwind engineer. I need you to write, an app based on what the user asked for. Here are some styles. Don't try to import stuff that doesn't exist, because I'm trying to render it in the browser and as minimal dependencies as possible. So yeah, let's ask it like to build a calculator app, which is probably the easiest thing. And you'll notice we also have a ShadCN toggle where I have like ShadCN components that you can put into. But yeah, there it goes. It's starting to write basically a React page, and hopefully in a few seconds we'll actually get it to render. And there it is. It just coded this calculator from scratch. I can do like 8 + 6 = 14, and so you can see it works. We can even, like, this is actually an interactive code editor as well. So we can even like come in here and add a div, a text 3XL, and we can make it just say calculator. Actually, that's definitely the wrong place to put it. Probably over here. But yeah, point is, like, it's interactive. You can play around with it. You can actually also ask it to make changes and like make it in like a red theme, or make it a scientific calculator, and it will go and it will change. You can also publish the app. So I can click this publish, and then you get this URL that I can paste into a new browser, and that's it. This is your calculator app. I can send it to you to try out and to check out. And so yeah, the idea is just having something where you can build these like small React apps, and there's a lot of different stuff you can build. This one I did build me a budgeting app, and I use ShadCN components, so you can see like it actually imports all of these components. And this is a full React app. Like, I can actually open Sandbox. So this component I'm using is called Sandpack. It's from the Code Sandbox folks. And so I can also click and get like the whole app and see it and download it locally and iterate on it. So, nice. You can see I have all the ShadCN components here. I just have like most of them. I put in most of them in there.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a budgeting app. I can say my income is $1,000, and I have like rent is $400, and it's in the food category. I can add it as an expense, so it's like interactive and kind of works. So that's essentially a basic demo of the app and what it can do. This was like a shopping cart thing I asked it to do. This was like a quiz that I asked it to build. And so it made me this little quiz about American history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
interesting.
That's essentially the app. I had about 400,000 unique visitors over the last couple months when I built it. And I can go through a little bit of the code to show you how like relatively simple it is.
That'd be awesome.
Awesome. So let's go through the code. So I'm going to click this GitHub repo right here, and I can actually go through. I wrote this more simple tutorial on how to build this. It's essentially, it's pretty, yeah. So this is it essentially, right? I started with a blank Next.js app, added an input, right, for this build me a calculator app. And then I have this create app function where if you click the input, it triggers the function, right? And it triggers this API route called generate code. I'll zoom in a little bit. And then this generate code function, I wrote it. And so we're using Together AI here on the back end. So I installed our TypeScript SDK. I initialized Together, and then this is how you call chat models. If you've ever dealt with OpenAI, it's fully OpenAI compatible. It's basically the exact same. You do together.chat.completions.create. We're defining our model, which again was Llama 3.1 405B, and we're giving it a very simple system prompt that says, "Hey, you're an expert React engineer," and then I'm passing in the prompt from the front end. Right? This gets the prompt from the front end. And then, on the front end, we're just going to await it. We're just going to await the response that we get back, and we're going to console.log it. And if we console.log it, you'll see that, it responds and it says, hey, below is a simple implementation of a counter component, because we asked it for build me a counter. And it gave all the code here. So we just have to basically find a way to just grab this React code and parse it right from here. And so we're going to add a little bit more detail to the system prompt. Over here, I say, hey, you're an expert React front-end engineer. Make sure to create a React component that exports itself. Make sure to don't start with anything else, like only return the code. Don't use any libraries. I saw that it sometimes was trying to import Zod or Hookform and all these other libraries, and then it wasn't working. So I try to make it as simple as possible, and then you can see we actually just get React code now. And then I use, like I said, this sandpack component that's really, really simple. This is all I had to do. This is like 5 lines of code to render that entire code component, where I had to define a template where I'm saying, hey, this is React and TypeScript. And then I say, okay, you have an app.tsx, and here's what's in the app.tsx. And I put in like the JSX that I want in there. And that's it. Like, this is how it looks in the browser. And obviously, we don't want to hard code this app.tsx, right? We want to have it be the code from the backend. And so when we're going to set a piece of state called generated code, we're going to update it when we get it back from the back end, and then we'll use sandpack to render it on the front end here. So if generated code exists, we're going to render sandpack. We're going to put in the generated code that we got from that backend function from create app, and then that's it. We get this entire component. And then this is a little bit more code in order to stream. And so we can put in more code in order for it to update in real time, like we saw it update. And you can add some more code to do that. But that's essentially it, right? Like that's, and then I expanded on it a little bit more, where this is actually the full system prompt right now. It's like, I added this like think carefully, step by step. I added some more stuff. I actually also added the ability for it to use Lucid React. Because the issue is, with these AI models, a lot of them hallucinate. And so when I asked it to use Lucid React in the beginning, it sometimes was importing components that weren't there. And so I tried to make it more targeted and say, hey, like you can only import the following components. So I added that. I added shadcn, like I said. So if shadcn is toggled, I now pass in basically shadcn docs. I have this component over here, this array that has all of these different shadcn components. I guess I'm only using 8 or 9 right now. And if I click onto any of one of them, I actually did this manually, where I went to the docs, I grabbed the way it's imported, the name, and the usage, like the different ways you can use a button, for example. And this is all I pass to the AI. I'm like, hey, here's this shadcn button component, here's how to use it in your app. And so if shadcn is specified, I say hey, here are some pre-styled components for you to use, and I pass in the shadcn docs. And that's essentially it. On the front end, like I said, we have that sandpack component that we're rendering. Say I added some more code just for styling for the most part. This is the model drop down where you can select different models actually, and then the shadcn toggle, and then down here is where we actually end up rendering sandpack. So we'll have so this is the publish app button, and then over here we have this code viewer component. And so all I do is I put this code in this code viewer component, and if I click into this component, it's essentially just sandpack. So over this is the simpler way, where I have some options that I'm passing in. I'm passing in the files, and again, I have to pass in all of the files because and I pass in all the shadcn components essentially here, and that's essentially it. This is all you need to display all of this
generated code.
Yeah, this entire component is from those 5 lines of sandpack, and it's a single API call that I'm sending and streaming back, and so that's essentially how I built this.
Very interesting to walk through this step by step, because when you look at it, it seems complex and complicated. But when you go through it, it's, again, a simple API endpoint, and a lot goes into prompting the system in a way that you get a response that you can parse it back into something you can pass to this sandpack. So that's where it has probably gotten the most amount of time from you to just iterate over and see to get back the good result. And oftentimes I find myself doing the same thing when I'm working with AI apps or any functionality. It's prompt, fine-tuning, and then RAG if you have your own data and you want to implement it really. Basically, you iterate over these 3 things and you get the functionality that you want. Now, in some apps, you're you're going to have multiple steps, maybe call functions, maybe have different sequences in place. But even in those sequences, you can boil it down to the same thing that you just said. One simple task, one simple API endpoint that is prompted in a way that works and returns the response that you need, and then that's it.
Exactly. And I would say, like, right now the app is done, but I'm still kind of iterating on it. And really the main thing I'm iterating on at this point is going to be like the prompt. And how do I make this better? Like, how do I make it generate a really good landing page? Like, if I ask it to build me a landing page for a electronics store, when I try to ask it to do this, it actually doesn't. I figured out that it doesn't really do a great job for landing pages. And so I thought, okay, how can I improve it? And it turns out a lot of these AI models are really, really good when you give them examples. So this is the electronics store landing page it built for me, right? Not amazing.
Yeah.
Not amazing. There's no headers, no footer, there's nothing. But if I take this and I go to what I have locally, and I'll actually just open, or I have it open here. If I go here and I ask it to build me a landing page, and you'll see this local version I have, I'm on a branch called this branch is called Few Shot Examples, where the only difference really in this branch is that here in the API route, I also have examples that I'm giving it. And here I'm giving it one example. I just have this one example called, it's just like a healthcare company landing page that I found. And I'm just giving it an example of like, hey, here's what a good landing page is essentially. I'm telling it that. So when we go here and we ask it to build the same prompt that we used before, right? To build this electronics store, we should hopefully get a much better one just by providing that single example of what a good landing page is. So we'll hopefully see it pretty soon. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm spending my time on these days of like, okay, how can I make the prompt better? How can I break it down? Yeah, look at the landing page it gave me now, where I can even publish it and so we can see it in more detail over here. This is the landing page it presented. You see it has a logo, it has a header now, it has all these sections. It has like a features section, it has a CTA at the end, it has a footer. You see like the difference between like this and the other one is crazy. And the only difference is I had that one extra example in my prompt. So yeah.
I like that few shots approach where you would provide some examples of the type of response or examples for the type of things you wanted to build, which basically comes back to your prompt engineering. Instead of having a single shot or not providing any example, the few shots approach usually solves a lot of problems when you give it examples.
100%.
Really nice. So you mentioned some models that the new Llama model that you're using in here, have you found that this is primarily good for generating code, or have you had any experiences with this model in other areas?
It's actually like one of the top open source models for most areas. Interestingly enough, like for a lot of AI models, sometimes there are some that are better at certain use cases, but I found in general, the biggest ones generally perform the best at most tasks. And so that's kind of the approach I took here. But there's, we kind of offer a lot of different types of models, and you can kind of choose and figure out what works best for you. This is the one I use, Llama 3B. We also have a 7dB version and an 8B version that are smaller and a lot cheaper as well. I think this one is like $3 per million tokens. And a token is basically, like 3/4 of a word. So if we assume, every query has about 1,000 tokens, which it does, like Llama Coder uses about 1,000 queries per every time someone generates an app, it's about 1,000 tokens. So it's a good example to use. So every 1,000 apps generated would cost $3 on Together AI.
I see.
With 405B. With 70B, every 1,000 apps generated would cost, I think it's about 90 cents. And then with 8B, it would cost 20 cents for 1,000 apps. So you can see like there's a pretty big price disparity. between these models because it depends on how big they are, right? These big models are just like, they're usually a bit slower, they need more GPUs, and so they're going to be more expensive. And so I like to tell people to experiment. Like for your specific use case, try the 8B, the 70B, and the 405B and see what works best. And if latency is really important or cost is really important to you, you might err towards the smaller ones. So we basically offer a lot of different models for people to try out and use. And that's just the chat models that we've talked about. And then there's, image models to generate cool images. There's vision models, which is basically like an image to text. There's embeddings like we talked about. There's re-rankers. There's a lot of extra stuff.
In the image models, you mentioned that you now support Flux. I've heard crazy, like good stories about Flux. What has been your experience around image models?
Yeah, Flux is amazing. Flux is it's so good. I'm actually going to be building an app around, or I actually built an app around Flux Schnell, which is the least powerful one, and it's called Blinkshot, and it basically helps you, or it will generate apps as you type. So a flying cat.
I think I've seen you tweet about this, but I didn't actually check out the app.
Yeah, so it's like, it just generated 5 images while I was typing that, and I can actually go back through them. And this is all Flux, and they're very nice and realistic, and they're just really good overall. And so the fact that they were able to make a model that's so good and it's so fast and small is pretty amazing.
Is it also good for edits inside the image or just to generate?
It's mostly good for generating images. For this one, less edit. I mean, even though you can basically, you can essentially prompt and you see it maintain the same image essentially, and it added this. So it's really good at that. I have this consistency mode thing, which is literally, this is a single API parameter that we provide called seed. And if you set a consistent seed, usually it's random. If you set a consistent one, it keeps the image relatively the same. And so it's pretty good for this, but not exactly if I wanted to put something inside of an image, not change a single thing about it. Probably not the best model, but for generating stuff even logos are really, really good. This is, I don't normally do this, but I can show off one of my next projects that I'm going to work on, which is a logo maker. And I actually got this design. My brother designed this with me. And it turns out Flux is really good at generating logos. And so it'll generate logos like this, where it's it actually ends up looking really good. This is generated in 3 seconds on Flux through Together. So this is probably an Apple launch later on in a week or two is image models. But yeah, there's so much you can generate with Flux. It's really cool. I've been a big fan.
Awesome. I've heard good things about Flux as well, but haven't seen applications that actually use or didn't know that they're using it. Now, one question that I want to ask is that you mentioned you're using open source models. Now, and you can run open source models locally for yourself, like using Llama or transformers from, I don't know, Hugging Face. What would be the limitations if you're running it yourself, or why would you want to use Together AI to just use their SDK and basically call their API endpoints instead of just running it locally or hosting it yourself?
Yeah, great question. So running it locally, Llama is awesome. The fact that you can get a model running locally really, really fast is incredible. I love Llama. With that said, for production use cases, you can't really, run a model locally and have an app deployed that a bunch of people are using. But you can use it yourself locally. If you wanted to do AI calls locally on your own computer and you didn't want to pay, Llama is a pretty good solution with certain caveats, right? Context, it's usually going to be a lot slower. I can usually only support the smaller models. You need a really powerful computer, all of this stuff. But the caveat for local testing, if you just want an API you really don't want to pay at all, you can try out Llama. I mean, we also have a pretty generous free tier at Together. You can do thousands, sometimes even tens of thousands of calls for free before you even start paying us. So I would say Llama is good for local. For hosting it yourself, it's pretty complex. And I'd say it's a little bit similar to something like Vercel, like why I would use Vercel versus just self-hosting, which actually there's more and more better self-hosting options these days. So maybe that argument isn't, like it used to be. I feel like a few years ago, it was like very, very hard to self-host. And now it's a little easier in the web dev space. And I feel like the same thing kind of applies to the AI space. To self-host, really, number one, you need a GPU. GPUs are not cheap. You need to, and you need to pay like per day, per week, per month for them. And really, it's like hundreds of dollars a day for a single GPU, especially if it's like an H100. So not only is it hard to self-host, but it's expensive. So, the people that really want to self-host will self-host at the end of the day. And the app developers who just want to build cool stuff and want to use, a nice serverless API will use something like Together.
Yeah, makes sense. To have a dedicated server with your own dedicated GPU. So it's just basically abstracting that complexity out for you to just call an API endpoint and use the service instead of having to figure out how to run this yourself. But it's good that working with open source models, you can test and develop and try them locally as well with the tools that like Llama. So yeah, that's great. So you kind of touched on where the apps you're building in future, but other than the apps that you're building, what are you up to? Like what's going on with you, in terms of what you're building, Together AI, or how you see what's coming? What's the next thing that's going to surprise us all, or give us some insider information?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a specific like model or something in mind that like, oh my God, this thing is gonna drop, in 3 weeks and it's gonna be crazy. I think like I'm just very excited to be in the space and to get to build stuff. I have a list of like 40 things I want to build now, and I'm already working on the next like 5 things that like I have a lot of half-finished projects where I just start something and then I just stop because it's just like so exciting and something else comes up. So I think like, I think the next big thing is really agents for AI models. It's really not using a single AI model like I do for a lot of my apps. It's using multiple AI models and chaining them together and building this like complete like workflow. Like even for Llama Coder, which we talked about, I'm actually in the process of making it this like agent system that has multiple API calls. So I'm going to have like the first API call be like to a software architect, where I'm going to tell it to like describe how you would build this app. And then I would take that plan and send it to a developer agent and have them code. And then I would send that to a reviewer agent and have them like troubleshoot the code for any bugs, then show it to the user. And when you break things down like this, and especially with agents where you can give it outside tools, I think that's something that really, really excites me. Like something that has access, like you can build an agent that has access to your calendar by just feeding in the Google Calendar API. And that's function calling, which is like something that we support as well on Together. So we're seeing more and more customers kind of use function calling and build agents. And that's something I'm particularly excited about. And I'm excited to build more stuff around that.
So how does it work with the function calling? Do you define the function inside Together AI and then it just gives you an API endpoint that you can call?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with function calling, you actually, all you do is you write the function, right? So you can have to write a function that, let's say for the calendar example, that interacts with the Google Calendar API. And so you write that function, and all you do is you pass it into Together, and you say, hey, you can pass it, like with Together, we allow you to like pass the function schema into a model. And what I mean by schema, you're passing the function name, the description, and the parameters that it takes. And so when you pass that in, the LLM is now aware that there's this function. And so if the LLM gets a question like, oh, hey, like, can you schedule a meeting with this person at 4 p.m. tomorrow? It'll know, oh, okay, it's talking about meeting, talking about calendar. I have access to a calendar function. I'm going to call that calendar function with the specific parameters it needs. Where if it's like schedule, it'll be like a slash schedule function. It'll be, the time and the person and the description and all that kind of stuff. And so we allow you to pass in these functions, and we allow LLMs to basically interact with the outside world.
Yeah, that's the best way to add more functionalities into your app. If you allow it to also call other functions, process different things, maybe call your own API endpoints to get some response back, and then chain that together with the AI.
Exactly.
So that's really interesting. For folks who are getting started to get into the AI, where would you say it's good to start?
Yeah, I'd say just go and build your first app. Go to any AI provider you want. I'm obviously biased. I'm going to say Together AI. You can go to OpenAI, go to Anthropic, go to any AI provider you want. Look at one of their APIs and just start querying it. Start using it. Build a simple chat app. I think the chat app is like the easiest way to start.
It's the to-do app of the AI world.
Yeah, it's the to-do, exactly, to-do app of AI. But yeah, just start building stuff, I think. And like, if you're a web developer, congratulations, you're like 95% AI engineer already. Like, really, like, there's some nuances to learn about, like, okay, what can AI actually do and what are the limitations and what models exist. And, there's some education there. But if you're, a full stack web developer, like, you already know everything you need to know. Like, it's a single API call. You can get started in 5 minutes by going to the Together AI docs, for example, and grabbing, like, we have five lines of code in Python or TypeScript or whatever SDK you use, and you can get started really, really quickly.
Beautiful. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, Hassan. Before we wrap up, we're going to include links to your socials and the projects that you had done for folks who are interested if they haven't already been following you. Any final words before we wrap?
No, just go build stuff. That's the main thing I want to tell people.
Yeah, that's the best advice, man. That's the best way to get your feet in AI and learn as you're building. Maybe something great comes out of it. Okay, so thank you very much, Hassan, for joining me on this conversation. Folks, this is a wrap for this conversation. If you have any questions, like always, hit me up in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.